The Detroit Pistons were searching for someone to resurrect their franchise this offseason, and they've turned to veteran NBA head coach Stan Van Gundy to get the job done. He's been given the keys to the franchise's car, leaving many to wonder which direction he plans to drive the franchise. With that, we wish you a pleasant good evening and welcome you into the latest edition of the Two-Man Advantage podcast. I'm Kevin McShann, and here to provide his State of the Pistons is Terry Foster of 97.1 The Ticket and the Detroit News. Terry, so great to see you, and thanks for being here today.
I need to correct you on one thing. They didn't give Van Gundy the keys. They gave him the hammer. Because he's going to have to hit somebody upside the head with that thing.
It'll be a long rebuilding process, yeah. So, Terry, there's been a lot of upheaval and change with the Pistons this offseason in terms of the structure of their overall organization and their roster. So I'm just wondering your initial thoughts on the state of the team.
Well, here's the state of the team. I actually like the fact that they got Stan Van Gundy and gave him dual roles as the president and also the coach. I usually don't like that, but with this team, you need that. What has happened over the years, the Pistons players do not respect the coach. And what they do is they come in, they get a new guy, and then they go to Joe Dumars and say, this guy stinks, let's get him out of here. And Joe's like, okay, fine. But now they can't do that with Van Gundy. A, he's getting paid. B, he's got Tom Gores' ear. 3, he's got power. He's got more power than any player in that dressing room. And to me, that's essential right there. That's why he's going to get the opportunity to change this around or make this work. Because you can't have Josh Smith going to the owner and say, hey, Mr. Gores, I don't like what's going on here. This is Stan Van Gundy's job. And all that player to management stuff, that's over with.
And in terms of the state of the roster, the Pistons this offseason basically stood pat, with the exception of Jody Meeks and a couple of three-point specialists. So I'm wondering if you think that it'll take some time to resurrect what Joe Dumars didn't do, and how do you think the state of the roster will be under Van Gundy?
Well, I still think the roster is troubled. Mm-hmm. I don't like the fact that you've got Drummond and Josh Smith together. There's just too many big forwards in there. Mm-hmm. And, you don't want Josh Smith on the perimeter. You want him underneath where he's effective. Andre Drummond is effective underneath. Greg Monroe is trying to develop some type of mid-range game, but he doesn't have it yet. So when you get those three together, I just don't like the fit. Now with Meeks and some of the other outside shooters, that's exactly what they needed. Let me tell you what was a turning point last year. Maurice Cheeks, before he was fired, told Josh Smith, man, we need you on the block. Josh Smith went down there, and, it was very effective for 3 or 4 games. What the league discovered is they had no three-point shooters. So slowly but surely, Josh Smith started floating out into the perimeter, and then that's when a bad season turned into a disaster.
And in terms of, you bring up Josh Smith and Greg Monroe, starting with Josh Smith, this offseason there was no secret. The Pistons tried to move him. Do you think that'll be a problem for them going into the season? And what do you think Josh Smith's future is with the team?
I don't know if he has much of a future. I think they're going to try to whittle away at that contract and try to move him. But look, it's easy to rag on Josh Smith. I don't blame him for everything that's happened. Now, here's what Josh Smith is. Josh Smith is a guy that just wants to play ball and hang around the perimeter if you allow him to. That's what the Pistons allowed him to do. They allowed him to do all the lazy stuff that he likes to do. But he needed somebody, we were talking about the hammer earlier, somebody with the hammer to say, dude, you can't do this anymore. This is not conducive to the team. Josh Smith will do what you allow him to do. Now, I have to believe Stan Van Gundy's going to say, man, you better take your big butt inside because this is where we need you, and all this three-point shooting is going to disappear. You notice Josh Smith threw up a record number of three-pointers last year because that's what he likes to do. Well, he was allowed to do it. Am I going to give him part of the blame? Absolutely. But most of the blame goes to a team that had no leadership from top to bottom and allowed Josh Smith to do whatever he felt like doing.
And in terms of Greg Monroe, he's back on a qualifying offer this year. But obviously the Pistons were trying to get a long-term deal done with him. What do you think took so long with Greg Monroe, and how would you forecast his future as a Piston?
Well, two things happened with Greg Monroe. I think he really wanted someone to give him a max deal, and he's not a max player, and he's not close. He's developing into that. The other thing, I don't think he wants to return to this team, particularly with the situation I mentioned with Drummond and especially Smith. I think he realizes that he can't succeed to the way that he wants to under the current circumstances. He was hoping for maybe a Hail Mary where someone would pay him big money, he'd be able to get out of here or maybe work out a sign and trade. His future, I cannot tell you what it's going to be, but here's what it's going to be predicated on. Are you going to keep Josh Smith? Or are you going to keep Greg Monroe? I think it's going to come down to that. If I have my druthers, I want to keep Greg Monroe because at least he's teachable and he's willing to learn and fight and hustle and do different things. Now, he may not be able to succeed, but he's at least willing to try.
And in terms of the ownership and the relationship between Gores and Van Gundy, when Van Gundy was hired, Gores continually referred to having a better relationship between the floor and the front office. So can you kind of translate that for me into what you think that means?
Well, I think a couple things. Tom Gores, and I think he realizes it, Gores and his henchmen who are here at the Palace, they don't have a connection to the floor. They don't really know what's going on. They don't know how to build a team. So it's not like one of his right-hand men can go to the floor, go in the locker room, and give him a report that's accurate and say, here's what's going on with the team, here's how you need to do things. Stan Van Gundy can do that. So what Van Gundy is doing is he's the electricity on the floor, and that's what he's going to provide. He's also a guy that's going to talk to Tom Gores a lot, and I think Gores does respect him. If you notice, you have two high-energy men. Gores is high energy. Stan Van Gundy is a high-energy guy, so maybe they can communicate better with one another, and it's probably a good mix. And I will admit, I did not respect Tom Gores as an owner. I just thought I called him Arthur, just a happy-go-lucky guy having a good time. I do respect what he did in hiring Stan Van Gundy.
And in terms of where they stack up in the division, how do you think having a big man such as Andre Drummond will help their stature within the division? And where do you think they'll stack up at the end of the year?
Well, they already had Andre Drummond. They already had all these guys. What they lacked to me is that chair at the end, the coach. I think Van Gundy can put them in playoff position. Now, whether he's going to put them in the playoffs, I don't know. I don't think so. And I know the East is weak and everything, but I think he's got to figure this roster out. It's not a complete roster. I think every time they try to make steps that the whole Smith, Monroe, Drummond thing is going to trip them up, even though individually they're talented players. But as a team, are they team guys? And I'm talking about where they're going to help each other and collectively. So when I look at the Pistons, I look at them as a number 10 team in the East. That they'll fight you some nights, but I just still think that propensity to quit sometimes is going to creep up and hurt them.
And in terms of the glut of forwards they have, we talked about that earlier. Do you think one of the big three have to come off the bench to make that work?
I absolutely think one of those big three have to come out, off the bench. But in the NBA, unfortunately, it's something you can't do. Josh Smith makes too much money. He's got a big name. Andre Drummond is on the USA team, so he's got his big, he's got a lot on the line too, so he can't come off the bench. Monroe is playing for a contract, so and you're trying to convince him to stay here in Detroit, so he can't come off the bench. So I don't know if you can make that work because everybody has too much at stake on that team, and the team is trying to make everybody happy. I just don't see it happen. Now, if Stan Van Gundy pulls that one off, man, he should be Coach of the Year.
I've got one final two-parter for you. In terms of where they stack up in the NBA, how do you think LeBron's return to the conference will affect the Pistons? And just overall, where do you think they'll finish within their own division?
Well, I tell you what, LeBron coming to the Cleveland really hurts the Pistons because now you've got another team that's clearly better than them. Now, Miami remains better than them. The Bulls remain better than them. The the Wizards will probably be better than them. So that hurts them because now it's like adding an extra team in the division, and now you've got to beat this team. And there's no way they're going to beat Cleveland, as far as, finishing ahead of them in the standings. But I look at the Pistons as kind of a bottom feeder. They're not as good as Indiana or Chicago or everything. So I think their whole goal is to try to stay out of last place in that division.
Well, Terry, thanks for a couple of minutes and providing your perspective on the state of the Pistons.
Thank you very much.
For the Two Man Advantage podcast, I'm Kevin McShane.